what the referees have going on all the time. So yeah, sorry, Greg, won't be able to spend a couple hours on rules for you. So it's just going to be a general overview. So thanks, guys, for having me. I appreciate being able to share, the officials' perspective, what we do on a weekly basis, and hopefully, out of this, you guys can all kind of learn about what it's like on the other side of the ball, or the third aspect of the ball, I should say. So this is me. I played football myself. I actually started refereeing while I was playing football at Queens. I took some time in the spring and joined minor football. I actually got invited by a former coach and then a referee. And it was really neat because it kind of gave me a different perspective of how to play the game. So I felt like when I went into my fourth and fifth year at Queens, I gained a new appreciation for, how to see the game, maybe learned a few tricks on things I could get away with. And then the other fun part was I kind of learned who I could complain to on the field and maybe get that extra advantage by having a good rapport with the officials. And I also got into coaching as well. When I finished playing at Queens, I stuck around and coached receivers for a year, coached quarterbacks for a year. And then I was also the special teams coordinator for the Grenadiers at the time it was the OVFL in Kingston. And then 2 years ago, I started refereeing in the OUA. Again, another eye-opening experience. It's a nice way to stay involved with the game. And I enjoyed the coaching aspect of it. Just unfortunately, it wasn't realistic for my own, family and my own time commitments. And, but the refereeing part that was nice, it allowed me to stay involved with the game. And also felt like I was giving back to the game. And especially at the minor level, I still feel like I could still, provide some, coaching input for players, whether it's, here's how to, block properly, or here's, if you find yourself in a tough situation, here's how to avoid, penalizing yourself and make a better block, let's say. And I'm as a profession, I'm an elementary school teacher. So I still get my kind of coaching fix through school. So I can still kind of do both sides of those. So as a referee, I have a couple main things that I kind of, for my philosophy, I feel like I'm part of building the game as well. I mean, without referees, it's kind of hard to facilitate a game. So, I feel like I'm an alternate coach and a bit of a teacher on the field, as well as kind of just keeping track of, what's happening in the game. And I, like I said earlier, I chose refereeing over coaching. Again, it's more of a hobby to me than anything. We get paid obviously to be on the field, but ultimately the financial gain from it is secondary. The other nice part about it is, I get a satisfaction of being, like I said, being part of the game. And the other cool part about refereeing is there's a certain social aspect of it. When I got into the OUA, it was neat because having played for, Team Canada, coached, around the OVFL, you get to reconnect with people all across the province, not only in the officiating community, but in the coaching community. It was really neat in the first OUA. One of the first games I got to do was Carleton and Western, on both sidelines were coaches that I had, guys who had coached me. And it was nice to have that kind of rapport with them and also be able to reconnect. So as I get into my presentation, the first thing I want to do is I'm going to start off with my own little bit of a rant. So in the Super Bowl, I got really frustrated because at the halftime, Boomer Esiason basically took an opportunity to take shots at referees. And I didn't really feel like it was really fair to the referees. The way that his comment was that referees were way too involved in the game. And, being a referee, I took offense to it. Because we don't pre-game decide like, okay, this is the day we're going to call 50 penalties and we're going to prevent this team from scoring touchdowns and so on and so forth. In the OUA, Greg knows that we have a weekly standards kind of meeting, and there's a memo that goes out to the coaches and the referees. And I can take a pretty good guess and assume and say that after the NFC championship games, maybe something went out about, hey, we should make sure we understand the rules about the defensive holding on receivers. And in the final game, obviously there's a bunch of calls that way. And I can tell you without a doubt that referees would much prefer a game without penalties. Um, we don't get paid by the call. We don't get paid by the hour. We just like the coaches. We want a smooth game. Uh, um, we want a smooth game, and we want everything to go as planned. Um, so anyway, so ultimately, it was frustrating to hear him say that we get involved, because what referees do is we observe the game, and then we call what we see. We don't make things up, and we don't before the play say, "Oh, I haven't called a penalty lately, so I need to call one now." Every play is a fresh start. I mean, we have our roles, which I'll talk about later. And when that situation, when we see something that we don't know, or sorry, when we see something that is illegal or unnecessary, then obviously we're going to apply the rules of the game. So in the from the Super Bowl perspective, yes, there was quite a few more flags than people were used to, but ultimately, obviously, the referees were following what they saw, and basically ultimately enforcing the rules of the game. So as an official on the field, we have the role of facilitating the game. So obviously, we place the ball, we start the play, we end the play, and we enforce the rules. We make sure everyone plays with them. Then we make sure the game is fair for everybody. Obviously, without referees, you can imagine which of the controversy would be like then, trying to play the game. Um, and then the other big thing that I think it's important to emphasize is that we're not spectators. So when we officiate the game, each official on the field has a specific role. And I'll talk about this in a couple of slides, but we don't watch the ball. The general the spectators in the stands, the coaches might be watching their positions, but for the most part, everybody's watching the ball carrier. Whereas the referees on a regular basis, we have our role in the field, and we ultimately doing it to make sure that everybody's following the rules. So referees in the field, there's a few things that we look at. And again, I put 3 main points here, but I could pull up the referees mechanics manual, which is about 15 pages long, and go through every single little tiny step. So there's quite a bit going through our heads and our routines as we go through the game. So in high school, there's generally a 4-man crew. We have the referee, the umpire, head linesman, line judge. And basically on every given play, there's 3 main things. The referee blows the play, the clock in. We make sure that the ball is in place, the sticks are set, and the officials are ready to go. You'll notice the referees on the sidelines will put their arms up. That's the gates closing, says it's no more substitutions. When the offensive breaks the huddle, the gates go down, and then the ball snapped, and then the play's on. And as I said, there's way more to it, and that's just kind of a quick glimpse as to the couple steps. So when you talk about the referees on the field, everybody's got their role. So for the 4-man crew, you got the referee, who's got he's got, like, again, I put 2 things there. In general, they watch the line plays. The ball gets snapped, they see what's happening on the interior line. But more importantly, there's the referee, the white hat. We got the QB to protect, and that's kind of priority number 1 for the referee and the behind the line of scrimmage. Now there's also like things in the back of their head, like they got to pay attention to timing, make sure substitutions are happening. So there's quite a bit going on at all times for the head referee. And then for the umpire, there's also, they stand behind the line of scrimmage. They're hanging out with the linebackers all game. Personally, the umpire is one of my favorite spots, because you get to really get into the game. You get to converse with the players, the linemen, the linebackers, and you're kind of always around. But in terms of actually watching the play, we're watching the interior line. And then if there's any passes that are in our area, we're assisting and ruling on those passes. And then the officials on the sidelines, they got quite a bit going on. So there's always going to be one official that's supposed to be held on the line of scrimmage. So they stay on the line of scrimmage. They're kind of always responsible for making sure, passes over the line of scrimmage behind, making sure the offsides and all that stuff. They watch the receiver play on the snap of the ball. And then when the ball goes dead, the sideline officials are the ones that are actually spotting the ball. So if you're going to complain to anybody about a bad spot, it's usually the person that's on the sideline. Don't give too much grief to the umpires, because all they're doing is looking for the sideline guys. Then there's an official who's also moving down the field. So there's usually covering the deep passes. they read the play, they react to where the receivers are going, they get downfield. Um, and then ultimately, after the play's over, every official is also responsible for dead ball officiating. So when it all is said and done, again, we're not just staring at the pile. There should be referees are kind of looking around and keeping an eye for kind of any late hits or anything illegal. Now, the other thing that's not on here for the sideline officials is we also have the stick crew to be taken care of. So, and I'll talk about it later about how coaches can help. A good stick crew goes a long way and takes a lot of energy off some of the sideline guys. Now, as I mentioned before, in terms of the referees, what they're watching, the general rule of thumb for officials is you don't actually pay attention to the ball carrier themselves until they're actually threatened. So, as otherwise, you're watching the blocking in front of the ball carrier if they're right in front of you, and then once they become threatened and somebody's close, that's when we kind of change our perspective. Watch for any illegal tactics when it comes to tackling, or watch for any fumbles and anything that would happen to the ball carrier. Now, like I said, there's a link to the mechanics manual. It's actually public viewing. If you go to the Ontario Football Officials Association website, it's pretty easy to find. There's a mechanics manual. I mean, it can't hurt as a coach to be aware of how that goes. One of the things I used to do when I was coaching with the Grenadiers in the OBFL is we used to place officials on the coaches on the field where officials would be, just to kind of get used to the officials being in those spots. That can always help out. So if you're always looking for any mechanic stuff, that's available on the OFOA website. So when it comes to four-man mechanics, one of the problems that we have, you probably noticed in this diagram, is that we have the sideline officials, the held and the free guy, and then we have the umpire and the referee. But there's a lot of kind of dead zone that ends up happening with the four-man mechanics. So your play calls can actually put us in quite a bit of make it quite difficult for us. So I know we just heard about the RPO offense. When you pull that ball, it's tough for our guys to get into position and follow that. So I want to show you a couple of clips here. This one here was a play in Kingston, and this is where just the point of, on broken plays, they're actually kind of like the worst thing for us. Not worst thing in the sense that we can still do our jobs, but it makes it quite difficult and puts a big strain on us. So in this clip here, the quarterback from Nelson scrambles. And as you can see, you have the free official who's on the top of the screen. He's following the receivers. What you can't see on the bottom of the screen is we have a held official who's supposed to be on the line of scrimmage. White hat's over here watching the quarterback, and then our umpires in the background. So what happens is the quarterback scrambles, and right here, as soon as he starts scrambling, the sideline official here kind of notices it, sees the short receiver here. There's obviously a receiver downfield. And in the process, our held official here is also kind of saying to himself, I got to get down and cover more field. So he also leaves the spot. Now, if you notice, if you're paying attention, the line of scrimmage was actually on the 47-yard line. So we got ourselves into a bit of a conundrum here because of the amount of field we have to cover as a four-man crew. We were unable to see exactly where he had thrown the ball from. It was close. And this last part of the clip also is what makes it difficult with a four-man crew, is that we have to get downfield and cover the play. So as you can see, from this point of view with the nice high vantage point of the camera, we can see that as an easy catch. However, as officials, it's a long distance that we have to travel to be able to make the call. So with a four-man crew, it is tough to cover a lot of the field. This is another clip to show how, again, you have usually the held official is on the wide side of the field. So if you have a quarterback like this team does, who could throw the ball deep to the wide side of the field, it makes it really tough for the official to cover that distance. So here we have a deep pass. And again, the official, unfortunately, who's following his rules, has about 20 yards to cover and see the pass. And then ultimately there was a foul called on the play. And it puts the referees in a tough situation to be able to see and kind of get to where they need to be. So that's just a couple of examples of what we're doing in the field. We're doing our best. And ultimately, officials we have a role in the field. again, we're not just watching the ball, and we're kind of following our spots. Now, as the level of football increases, as the quality of football increases this season, we also have a 6-man mechanic, where all of a sudden you're adding a back judge and a side judge, a deep side judge, who, again, it adds more eyes in the field and more roles and perspectives. So ultimately, like in Kingston, we start adding the 2 extra officials in the semifinals and the finals. Depending on, ultimately it depends on funding, right? I think Ottawa still does 3-man crews for some of their regular season games, which again adds more kind of black holes in the field. But as the season goes on, if you have the funding or you have the resources, it's always better to add a couple extra officials just to get more eyes in the field. Now, one of the things that I've heard complaints of before is that all of a sudden you do 6-man mechanics, and there's suddenly the number of flags seem to be increasing, and that's usually a result of all of a sudden we have these extra officials. There's more field to cover, and each official actually has a more specific role. So in a 4-man crew, the sideline guys, the H and the M in this picture, would actually be covering 3 receivers on their own. Whereas as soon as you add the 2 deep guys, they can be more specific on the receivers, and we can follow them for that 5 to 8 yard kind of buffer to see what's one-on-one, and then we move to a zone, which is in the color picture on the right. And again, you can see that we cover a lot more area on the field. So that's in season. And again, like I said earlier, that's just, I'm just covering kind of regular run-of-the-mill kind of middle of the game kind of scenarios. I didn't cover any of the kicking plays, so I don't want to keep you here all night. But there's quite a bit for referees going on any given play in the middle of the game. So when the games are over, that's not it for the officials. In Kingston, we actually run weekly meetings. We'll get together once a week, and basically the meetings will consist of, we'll do clinics, we'll talk about new mechanics. We'll also kind of look at plays that we'll look at weird plays that happen during the week, and we'll learn from them. If there's mistakes that were made, we'll learn from them. We'll review the interesting plays. And then we'll also talk about, the other thing is in the off season, we do have like fitness standards. So there's a group of officials from across Canada just finished a January fitness challenge where we're kind of keeping each other in check, doing some fitness. The other thing that we'll do, and again, who knows with the COVID stuff going on, but on a normal year, we usually send a couple of officials to our league AGMs, and so whether it's our minor leagues, when our high school coaches get together, we'll send the referee in chief and usually our president to go and just sort of be present for the discussions. And also for our sake, we get to learn from the coaches. And we also join in coaches clinics like this one, sit around, find out what the new trends are, find out what teams are doing. And again, the more we know, the more we work on in the off season, the better we can be in terms of adapting to changes. So one of the questions that I was getting as I was building this, what can coaches do to make the game smoother for the officials? And one of the biggest things that I noticed when I got into refereeing was one of the big things is that a lot of coaches aren't fully familiar with the playbook, or sorry, the rule book. But the other big one was the pregame meeting. So as an official, we meet with the coaches pregame, start with the home team to find out anything about the field and specifics about the play. But a lot of times the coaches don't seem to have a lot to tell us. So our script is usually, we ask the home team coach about what's happening in the field, and usually the visiting coaches, we usually ask them if they have any questions about the field. The other thing that I find interesting is the coaches have a tough time knowing what a trick play looks like. So I know when I was one of my early years, one of the first times I was a white hat for a game, went up to a coach and said, "You got any trick plays?" No, it's fine. And then I think it was the second play of the game. All of a sudden, he ran an offset line where the center was an eligible receiver. So anyway, as soon as there was a bit of a break in the play, I went to the coach and said, "Hey, when you do something like that, it's usually a trick play." So any kind of trick play is any play where you intentionally try to mislead the opponent. There's a few teams, and a team in Ottawa used to run like a hitch screen where they'd bounce the ball off the turf, but it'd be a backwards pass to a receiver who throw it down the field. That's a trick play. It's good for us to know so the referees can, we can be prepared for that and not be kind of blindsided ourselves. And then the other thing is you can ask for rule clarification pregame, right? And then that way the referees know that you're asking questions and we can give you that feedback as it happens. And then the other big one that we don't get a lot of that we would love to is, get just a general offensive game plan. In Kingston, we have a school that runs like the wing T, like we heard about earlier. And then all of a sudden, again, in the middle of a game, they go from a wing T to a full spread. And as officials, we have to adapt on the fly. But if we know that it's coming, we can, again, be focused on our roles as opposed to kind of just like trying to scramble and get into position and be able to see everything. The other thing that we recommend for coaches too is if there's something you're thinking about, designing a trick play for later on in the season, is start asking us in the pre-games earlier, so we can kind of clarify. And we're also available outside of the general game day stuff. I'll talk about that in a bit later. The other big thing you guys can do to help out is with stick crews and timers is when you put a stick crew together, is one, have one arranged before the game so we don't have to kind of scramble in the last couple of minutes before the game, and get somebody who's competent and who's done it before. I know locally we have, our coaches do a pretty good job of finding people that are keen and interested in doing it, and that goes a long way because when you have a sideline official who's trying to watch all the stuff that's going on line of scrimmage, it's nice to not have to have that extra group of 3 people that you have to be concerned about and kind of get them moving. And then the other big one is hire a good timer who knows what they're doing, who's again done it before. We have we always kind of joke, that's not really a joke, it's usually the best timers are people who don't actually care for football and people who are a little bit older, the grade 11 range, because they don't watch the game. The referees before the game say, always watch me, watch my hand signals. And it makes such a big difference to have somebody who actually runs the clock properly. Whereas if you get some, a player or somebody who's like injured to run the clock, they're often invested in the game. They might miss a stop clock and so on and so forth. And especially in the last 3 minutes when the time really, really is important, it's really nice to have that good quality timer. And then the other thing you can help us with is giving us access to your game film. We have about 5 or 6 schools in Kingston who have their own different version of game film, and just having that access goes a long way for us because we can do our own planning before the game. Before any of our big games with 6-man crews, we usually have a bit of an hour-long pregame before the game. And if we have access to the film, we can start looking at that film the week before, just to get our head around tendencies and certain players and just see what's going on and get used to the players and not have to spend the first couple of plays kind of getting ourselves acclimatized to the different offenses and the schemes that we're seeing. So this is the fun part, Greg. I know you've been waiting all night for this. So there's a few kind of misinterpreted rules that kind of pop up a lot in the minor football, and I'm sure there's some out there that you guys are looking for specifically, and you can ask me those later. But the biggest ones that we always get complaints of or concerns of, or having to stop the game and go over and explain to coaches, that's kind of what I picked out. So the first one is the biggest is UR application. So a lot of times coaches are kind of UR being like a face mask or a block in the back and so on and so forth. Coaches wonder why they get penalized. It feels like more than 15 yards and going back to the line of scrimmage. So the rule of thumb is that if a UR happens during a play, the team, the non-penalized team has 2 options. You can apply the penalty from the previous line of scrimmage, so repeating the down and going back 15 yards, or you can take the play as it happened and you can apply the penalty at the conclusion of the play. So if it's second down and the ball carrier's tackled 3 yards short of the first down, you can accept the play. So you roll the down, it's third down, and you can take 15 yards from where the play ended. So that way it becomes 3rd and 18 instead of the 3rd and 3. You don't have to decline the penalty. So there's a big difference in that one. And usually where coaches and I can tell you right now that referees are pretty aware of what these rules are. So oftentimes you might see a referee just helping your players out and suggesting one thing or the other. But this is one that usually gets coaches kind of frustrated, obviously, with the additional yardage when it goes back to the previous line of scrimmage and you have to keep going even further back. So that's URs. The other one that gets confusing is dual fouls. So if there's 2 fouls on a play against both teams, that penalty, the way that it works is we always start with the first penalty that was called. So we apply them in order of when they occurred. So if there's a holding followed by a defensive pass interference, holding on the offense followed by a defensive pass interference on the defense, what we do is we start with the holding penalty, we apply that penalty. So if it was 1st and 10, it becomes 1st and 20. And then assuming the defensive pass interference is accepted, it's a 15-yard penalty. We move up 15 yards after the holding penalty applies. So the result would be the offense gets a 5-yard gain and then downs repeated. So often, now this is excluding any URs and OCs. If there's a UR or an OC, that would be applied after the fact, after the result of the initial penalties, and it would be a down repeated situation. So then the next one that always gets gets people real fired up is the old when is the knee on the ground? When is the knee on the ground a dead ball or the play is terminated? So anytime you're fielding the ball in a kick play, the returner, if they go on a knee while they were in the act of receiving the ball, we're going to let that go. Now, if it's a catch and then drop to a knee, then get back up, then obviously that's down. But if they're in the act of receiving it, as they're picking it up, their knee is on the ground because they're fielding it like a shortstop, we're going to keep that going. The other one that we often hear about is if a quarterback or a punter are fielding the ball and their knee goes on the ground. Again, if they're in the act of fielding it, then it's then we're going to let them keep playing. It's when their knees are on the ground. If you're receiving a pass catch and your knee goes down, it's a dead ball. That usually goes along to more of the safety aspect of the game. And if there's 2 knees on the ground, then yeah, that's definitely down, whether you're fielding the ball or not. Next one is the DB jam at the line of scrimmage. So for as far long as I've been officiating, there's a 1-yard zone where they're allowed to jam. You're obviously the defender's always allowed to defend their own space anywhere on the field. We usually define that as anything within their body space, as long as they don't have to take a step and extend their arms. So if a receiver gets too close and is within arm's reach, then obviously again, you get to defend your own space. But as soon as you have to take a step, extend your arm, that's a problem. The 5-yard jam is the one that we always hear is like, I thought it was 5 yards. That was an American rule. And that's that's another something that we get a lot of in Canada is it's like, oh, on the NFL, I watched on TV, they didn't call it that way. And oftentimes it's because it's an American rule and there's obviously quite a few differences there. So the other big one that we see a lot of confusion with is timing under 3 minutes. So the way the 3-minute warning starts is that when the clock goes below 3 minutes, we stop the clock. We identify that there's a 3-minute warning. There'll be 3 whistles, followed by a 4th whistle, which starts the clock running again. So after 3 minutes, the clock is actually going to be running on the very first play under 3 minutes. And it's not until after that the play stops for the following thing. So under 3 minutes, once that 3-minute warning is gone, first of all, the clock always stops at the end of every play. So you don't have to worry about, we see coaches running up to us, freaking out after as soon as the player goes down, we're calling timeouts. Under 3 minutes, the clock always stops at the conclusion of every play. The trick is when will the clock start again? So the clock stops and it's held until the ball is snapped. So this is where the clock always stays stopped until the snap back into play is if there's an incomplete pass, if the ball goes out of bounds, the ball carrier goes out of bounds. If there's a kicking play, so that's anytime there's a turnover, a timeout, if there's an accepted penalty, or any procedural penalties. So there's an offside or a procedure, or if there's a, like I said earlier, a turnover. So any of those plays, guy goes out of bounds, you can generally take your time because the clock won't be running until the ball is snapped. The clock runs whenever on these three scenarios. So again, let's say the ball carrier goes down inbounds. What the referees will do is they'll get the ball, they'll place it. We'll wait until the sticks are set. We'll make sure that our referees are all set. We're not going to wait for you guys to kind of finish your huddle and get set. It's up to, once we're able to facilitate the game as we should, then we're going to put the ball, or we'll turn the clock, we'll wind the clock in, and the time starts rolling. So even after an injury, if there is an injury, once the player's off the field safely, referees are all set, the sticks are set, that's when we start the clock before the ball snap. So if the obvious one is if a player's tackled in bounds, then once the ball is reset, sticks are ready to go, referees are ready to go, we wind the clock and the clock runs. And obviously, like I said, within the 3-minute warning. So that's pretty well it for the misinterpreted plays. I'm sure there's a few more out there that some of you would love to hear about. If that's the case, I'd be happy to kind of talk one-on-one. But one of the other things I wanted to promote a little bit is just the future of referees and officials. Because of this pandemic, we might have a bit of a problem in that a lot of the officials that we have in our associations are usually retired teachers. It's people that are taking the refereeing up as a hobby. And one of the problems we're seeing already is that because of the pandemic that's happened, is people are starting to realize how nice free time is. Because there was no football in the spring and the fall, guys are saying, like, realizing how nice it is to have a weekend free. So we're actually pretty worried about how many people we're going to have come back once football resumes. And when that's the case, we're going to have a bit of a problem in terms of being able to field officials for games. As it is, we have some guys who, at some weekends where we have to do triple headers, guys doing 3 games in a row. And as you know, the difference for officials and players is there's no offense and defense. We're on all the time. So some games can be quite physically taxing, especially with this style of offense that you guys that you run. So I'm a little biased on this one, but former and current players usually prove to be the best referees. One of the things I was talking to one of our supervisors in the OUA, and he mentioned that Ottawa in the 2000s, the Ottawa GG's program, they actually did a bit of a program where they had any players that were redshirt players who basically ran on the scout team roles. What they did is they asked those players to go join the Ottawa Football Referees Association and referee minor football games. And it just kind of developed that knowledge, like I mentioned earlier, that extra knowledge for the game. And then when they developed into their playing careers, they could use that knowledge. And I think from that program, there's actually a couple guys out at Hamilton from that played on that Ottawa GG's teams that kind of developed there. The other big thing that for officiating, if you're looking for all officials to be available, is to consider doing kind of like a jamboree or Friday Night Lights style of games. I know for myself, once the daylight saving times kicks in, none of our local high school games happen after 2:00. So as an elementary school teacher, I can't get out of school until 2:30. So unfortunately, I can only referee games on the weekends or at night during the school year. So if you run a Friday Night Lights or a Thursday night kind of sequence of games, it makes it a lot easier for the associations to kind of field officials and kind of have everybody available, especially after work hours. Now, there's a few things that we can kind of do to promote more referees, especially at a younger age. This year, the TIMFL, which is the local Kingston minor football league, we were going to try a pilot program this year where within the minor divisions, so the I guess it's Adam level football, we were going to have our 4th official was actually going to be a local high school player. They'd be a line judge. We put them not necessarily in the full uniform, but just sort of ask them to call off sides and just kill the play when it happens, and just to get them on the field, get them used to the experience. And if it's something that they enjoyed, then obviously we could continue our training and, you know, hopefully develop them into officials as they got older. The OUA was also going to build. They were doing a little pilot program where at the East West Bowl this past year, they were going to have players from. They were going to nominate one player from some teams and have them kind of join the officials on game day. So, you know, and locally we've had quite a few new younger guys kind of join in. And then it's just coaches kind of recommending it to players. I know Pat presented last week. They've got a couple guys that joined us. You know, just again, that's just the coaches saying, hey, like, there's obviously some specific personalities that make better referees, but just the coaches recommending it goes a long way. Just put the bug in the players' ears. Say, hey, I think you'd make a great official one day. Like, you should consider it. And then once that's bugs in their ear, you know, the more officials that we have, the better it's ultimately, the better our game is going to become. And as we all know, we need officials to run the games. So, you know, as I said, my presentation tried to cover all the kind of basics of what a referee does and some rule stuff. But if you do have more questions, you know, you should contact your local associations and the referees there, because I can tell you from experience, we're happy to run clinics and we're happy to show up at your practices and kind of clarify things with your players. And we also happy to run information sessions. We're also happy to join in on your meetings as coaches. So if you guys like, you know, if you have within your associations have coaches meetings where you discuss what's going on, invite a referee, see what they do. We also have rule books available. You know, it can't hurt to have one on hand. You can look up your own rules yourself. I mean, there's lots of stuff in there, but it's always nice to clarify some things as they're happening. So I'd be happy to answer a few questions tonight if anybody has any. The other thing is, you know, as you have questions during the season, your local associations are more than happy to help you out. And sometimes your questions are great teaching points for us as officials when we go into our weekly meetings. So if you do have any rules questions specific to plays that happen in your season, the best thing to do is contact your local association. You know, I'd offer my assistance. However, having not been in the situation, not being in your association, I don't want to obviously step on any toes, but your local association, again, most are usually very happy, you know, to be part of the process of everybody kind of learning and building the game. So that's it for me. I appreciate all you guys allowing me to present.